Hello and welcome to this VIKTOR tutorial. In this video I'm going to walk you through our data analysis tutorial. Right now I have the final application in front of me, and as you can see I have the ability to select two variables based on my dataset. Here I am using a car dealership dataset to investigate what type of cars are good for business. Of course, some information is more informative than others, so with this app I can save time by quickly comparing two variables that I'm interested in. As an example, let's change this to the number of cylinders. As you can see, the app updates immediately. I also have some additional data that I would otherwise need to calculate or look up in my chart. I have this data in this pop-out, and here you can see the total sold, the most occurring cylinders and the least occurring amount of cylinders from the dataset. We will be starting with an empty app template. To quickly remind you how to create a template, you will first need to make the folder for the app. You have to do that in the VIKTOR apps folder. Then we need to generate the files using the VIKTOR CLI create app. And for this tutorial, you will want to choose the type editor. Next, we will clear our VIKTOR database using VIKTOR CLI clear. It's also important to not forget to add Pandas and Plotly to the requirements for this data analysis tutorial. Then we can use VIKTOR CLI install to install the application. Once it's done installing, we can start the app and begin building the elements. If you have not done this before or would like a quick refresher on how to do it, you can watch the in-depth video in our documentation. If all went well, you should have the same overview as I do. You can see we have a template with some initial imports, and then we have our parameterization class and the controller class. VIKTOR does not require you to know what classes are, only that you recognize that we will use the parameterization to define our inputs and buttons, and the controller class for the views and the calculations. As a quick reference to our final app, the parameterization will correspond to the left side of the screen with the inputs and the controller to this right side. Before we start coding, let's start the app using VIKTOR CLI start in the terminal. And we can click the link that appears and open our browser. You may then open your development workspace and you will see the empty app. Here we will be able to see all our changes as we build the application. For this app, we will need some data to analyze. In our documentation, under this tutorial, you can find a sample data set. It consists of the car data of a dealership that I showed you earlier. You can download that set and follow this tutorial word for word. After you have downloaded the file, make sure to add it to the folder in which you have the application. In my case, this is in my VIKTOR apps where I have named this app VIKTOR Tutorial. Now that we have our data, let's extract it into a Pandas DataFrame. Pandas DataFrames are a widely used tool to organize and analyze data in Python. For this, we will also need to specify the path to the dataset, in this case the parent folder of the app.py. And from there we can extract it. So let's start by importing path from pathlib. You can do that by going up here and typing from pathlib import path. Then we will also need pandas. We added to the requirements earlier, so we can simply add import pandas as PD. The next step is to define our function to extract the data. Let's call it extract data. Then we will need to give it a parent folder path. We will just call that parent folder and use path for that. This will give us the path to the parent folder. Very simple. Then since we now have the path to our parent folder, we also need the path to our file. In this case, the car sales CSV. So we can go file path is equal to parent folder slash car sales dot CSV. Now that we have our file path, we will use the power of Pandas to extract the data. Pandas has a function called readCSV for that. It will take the file path, and we need to give it the separator that we are using. All right, once you have that, you can return the Pandas DataFrame, and that's our function complete. The next step we are going to take in building our app is to add some input fields. We want these input fields to be a single choice option field. So let's start by importing this from VIKTOR.parametrization. Then we can go into our parameterization class, we can remove path, and let's specify the first input as our main column. This will appear on our x-axis. For this, we will use the option field, and we will let the user know that this is the main property that they can choose. For the options, we will need to use the columns from our data. So we can specify that the options is equal to the extract data, and that we want the columns of the data set and their values. Now it's also important to realize that the options field takes a list, so we will need to write this as a list. When you have that, you can copy it for the column that we want to count. Let's make sure to rename it. And let's change this to and the rest can stay the same. Just like in every tutorial, we want to take the user experience into account. A great app will guide the user, and here we will do that by adding an informative text. First, we will import text from the VIKTOR parameterization. Then we can go into our parameterization class, and we can say that we want to write our introduction. Feel free to copy this introduction for yourself. When you have that, let's save our app in our editor, and let's make sure we don't have any bugs. As you can see, the app is ready. I will go into my browser and refresh the page. If all went well, you will now be able to see the text and our options. Now that the inputs work, let's continue and plot our data. Let's go into our editor, and the first thing we will need to do is import the view that we call the Plotly view. So from VIKTOR views, we import the Plotly view. The Plotly view also needs the Plotly result, so let's add that. Since we're using Plotly for this, we will also want to import plotly.graphObjects. And let's import it as Go to make our lives a little bit easier. Then you can scroll down into the controller, and let's start our view by making the decorator. We will make this a Plotly view. We will give it the name bar chart, and since we're not making any difficult calculations, let's set the duration guess to 1. Then we can define the function. We will call it generate Plotly, and that one will take the arguments self, params, and the quarks, and that's pretty much always the same. Next, we have that data extraction function, so let's get the data into our Plotly view. Like so. This data will need to be edited in such a way that we can easily plot it. For this, I will need to group it, and this will depend on our inputs. So let's make sure that we group it by the main column and then count the sales based on the choice we made for the count column. In VIKTOR, I can access the values of the parameterization through the single variable called params in the controller class. The way that will look for editing our data is I can make the variable edited data, and we can take the data. Then I want to group it, and I want to group it by something. And let's group the main column. So, since the inputs in VIKTOR are stored in what's called a munch, we can use it similar to a dictionary, but with a point denotation. That will look something like this. So now I can access the main column choice from the option field, like so in my controller. Then here I will need to enter params.count column, and then we need to count the values that we have in the data using value counts. Now Pandas will try to keep the index labels based on the hierarchy, and we don't need that, so we can unstack this data. And what it will also do is it will leave some not applicable or NAs in our data. So we want to fill that with zeros. And we can do that by saying fill NA with zeros. And that is our edited data. Next, let's make the bar chart like we saw in the beginning of this video. We will need to loop over the columns in our edited data for this. Let's start by using the graph objects to make our figure. We can go figure equals go.figure. Then let's write a for loop and loop over the columns in our edited data. Like so. Then we need to add each column to the figure. So we'll go fig.add trace. And in here we need to specify that we want the graph object as a bar. And on the x-axis we want to have the edited data in the index. And for the y-axis we want to have the data in the column. Like so. Finally, we'll need to give it a name as well, and that is simply the name of the column. Let's also style the bar chart a bit. We will change the bar mode and titles. We can just go fig.update layout. And there we say bar mode is equal to stack x-axis title needs to correspond to our choice in the option fields of the main column. So that needs to be params.main column. And for the y-axis title, we will want it to be the amount sold because we're counting that amount for each column. So we'll use a string there. And that's how we update our figure layout. Finally, we need to close this function of generating the Plotly. So we will write return plotly result and then the figure. And now it's important that we do this as a JSON. So we quickly convert the figure to JSON. That's a lot of code. Let's make sure it works. Let's save app.py. And if all went well, app will be ready, like that. Then you can go into your browser and refresh. We'll see our inputs here. And if we now choose to, let's choose the make and the body style. Then as you can see, the graph updates and our sales data is nicely plotted. To make it a bit more interesting, let's add some data insights in the pop-out to help explain the numbers a little bit more. We want to know the total amount of sales, the most occurring and the least occurring car. For this, we will need to change our plotly view to the plotly and data view. So let's go into the editor. Let's go all the way to the top. And from our VIKTOR views, let's change this to a plotly and data view. And for the plotly result, we need to do the same, plotly and data result. In order to use the data result, we'll also need to import the data group and the data item. And that will fix our imports. It is important to not forget to change the decorator and the return statement, so let's quickly do that. And data result. And this will not work because the plotly and data result will need an extra input to return. For this, we will make the summary of data. To make the summary of data, we can simply go back into the function and let's define it as the summary. And this will be the data group that we just imported. Inside the data group, we will need to specify the data items. So start with the data item. We'll give it the name total sold. And that one will correspond to the length of our data. Then for the next item, we will go for the most occurring car, or at least the most occurring type that we filter on. And that will be named most occurring. And then we need to take the edited data for this. We'll take the sum and then the maximum of each of these sums. Like that. Since we also are interested in the minimum or the least occurring, we can easily copy that from the top one. And then we just change the name to least occurring. And instead of taking the IDX max, we will need to take the IDX min from the edited data. Like that. Then the last thing you'll need to do to show the summary is to add it to the plotly and data result. Go ahead and save your app. As you will see, it will start reloading. When it says app is ready, go back to the browser, refresh the page. We will need to choose two options again. Let's go for that make and that body style again. And as you can see, I now have my extra information here on the right in the pop-out that I can close if I want to focus on the bar chart. And there you have it. You have completed this VIKTOR tutorial. Now, if you would like to expand this application, Something you can try is to have the user upload a dataset using a file field so that they can choose their own data to analyze. You can also try to display the data as a pie chart or even using multiple charts in subplots. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you want to learn more about the possibilities with VIKTOR, feel free to try out our other tutorials. For now, good luck and happy coding!